Chapter 12, Informal and Formal Groups. Learning objectives. Group dynamics, the nature and effects of informal groups, informal leaders, differences between task and social leadership roles, brainstorming and nominal, Delphi, dialectic techniques. Group dynamics. So, social process by which people interact in face-to-face in small groups. Study of forces operating within a group. Groups have properties of their own, differ differ from properties of the individuals who make up the group. No two no two people can be understood without examining a relationship. So when you look at the dynamics of a group, you have the group dynamics, but then it's broken down by the individuals within that group too. And they all have different properties. They bring different stuff to the table, the good, bad, and the ugly. And it says no two people can be understood without examining their relationship. What type of relationships are you having amongst people in this group? Types of groups. So you have formal groups. These are established by the organizations, officially, but recognized organizations. Informal groups, and these emerge as basically by interest in people being associations, and they are informal, not sponsored by an organization usually. Differences between formal and informal organizations. Basis of comparison. Informal organizations, formal organizations. So you look at this and you see general nature, how they differ. Unofficial, major concepts. Informal, power and politics, authority, responsibility, primary focus, person, position, for source of leader power given by group. So in other words, when you have someone can't be in power in an informal situation, not unless people give it to them. When it's a formal organization, it's the position that they hold. Guidelines of behavior is what's the norms for that group. Are they good group? Are they good norms or bad? And rules and policies. Sources of control, sanctions and rewards and penalties. So you see this is very different between formal and informal. Formal and informal organizations, their effects. So you look at formal, activities, interactions, and sentiments, how it affect employee performance. Informal, emergent, organization system, activities, interactions, sentiments. You see how one's for employee performance, others for employee satisfaction. You see how they intersect in there. So these things are connected. Informal leaders. So when you have informal leaders, employee with the largest amount of status in the informal organization. Socialize new members into the organization, perform complex tasks, model, explain key norms, build and sustain cohesiveness, use a high esteem of their position to balance additional responsibility. So this is something where you're not elected to. You're almost like you're voted to it by. I'm sorry, you're not put in it by officials, but you're almost like you voted by your peers or a group of people, or you ascend to the top, and then you bring in all your status within this informal organization. A lot of times sometimes I've seen leaders where they say, the leader is having a difficult time because the informal leaders are making his job hard. So informal leaders. So informal groups overlap. A group can have multiple informal leaders. One primary leader has more influence than others. Leaders can be identified by distinctive behaviors. Drawback are not always the best formal manager. So when you see these, there's to be, depending upon what type of group it is, how big it is, you could have multiple leaders in there. There is usually one alpha though, somewhere. And, and people play their certain roles with different behaviors and stuff. And sometimes the problem with some of these informal leaders, sometimes they don't make the best formal manager because for various issues. Potential benefits and problems associated with informal organization. So when we look at this cohesiveness, indicated by how strongly the employees stick together, rely on each other, and desire to remain members of the group. Factors that increase cohesiveness, creating competitions against other groups, having frequent interactions amongst members. So they find ways to bond. And that can be any number of ways, but they do bond and they become cohesive. Selecting members with similar attitudes, backgrounds, and values, identifying a challenging group goal, recognizing a major threat or common enemy to the group. So when you see these things, that's what you call like-minded people, people who kind of think alike. It may not necessarily be the same race or the same gender. They may have something else in common, which those could also be something that you would factor in there. Problems associated with informal organizations. Resistance to change. Sometimes you have these informal organizations, see, their interests are not the same as the companies or organizations, so they may be resistant to change. Cause employee conformity, encouraged by societal norms. So may get people to actually do things that's consistent with society, but may not be consistent for organization. Reference groups, groups whose norms a person accepts. Nonconformists may pressure and be harassed until they capitulate or leave. Role conflict, uh, not subject to the manager's direct control. So when you see this, you see how they can go bad. So realistically, whether or not they go good or bad, you know what it depends on? People. Do they have good intentions, whatever else? But they're still going to have some of these things. Imagine you have a group of people who want to do something and one person doesn't, and they put pressure on him or her to do something. Monitoring informal organizations, network charts, focus of either interpersonal feelings expressed among individuals or actual behavior exhibited, determines who trusts whom, and selects an individual to negotiate satisfactory compromise on an issue. Reveals central individuals and isolated persons, differences between what outsiders think and what is happening. So you see, when you look at these, it's like a network, and you see how they'll fall in the roles. But they have to determine on who they want to trust and who they want to put forth and who they speak on their behalf. Almost like a union. So accept and understand the organization. So when you look at this, you like guidelines for influencing informal organizations. Accept and understand them. You got to accept them. Know who you're dealing with. Identify various levels of attitudes and behaviors within that group. Consider possible effects on informal systems when taking any kind of action. Integrate the interests of informal groups with those of formal organizations. Keep formal activities from unnecessarily threatening them. So, in other words, you try to find ways these informal organizations, groups and stuff, to try to bring them into the fold versus leaving them on the outside or letting them just operate on their own willy-nilly. Formal groups. Time spent in formal groups is criticized as being an unproductive source of confusion, misinformation, and an excuse for indecision on the part of an individual decision maker. So you see this a lot of times. People complain, all we do is have meetings to talk about meetings. When you have a formal group and stuff, that means things are structured and planned and usually sponsored by an organization or a company. And that means rules and policies and ethics and things have to be abided, have to be talked about. So this is where you find people like, well, we're just wasting time talking about all this other stuff. No, you have to talk about it because it has legal ramifications if you don't, particularly if something goes wrong. Formal groups. Prevalence of negative attitudes is attributed to lack of trust and missing or incomplete information. Belief that meetings are not part of work, which I kind of alluded to earlier. Poorly run meetings and a view that meetings are the end result, not the means to an end. So again, when you have these formal groups, sometimes you can have people say like, well, in these when we have these meetings stuff, management only tells us certain things, but they don't tell us the truth. They're holding back things. They're not being honest with us. And again, some folks, we keep having all these meetings. Why we keep having all these meetings when we could be working if we wouldn't having these meetings? Committees, group in which members who have the authority to handle a problem meet to discuss and resolve it. Group's authority is expressed in terms of one vote for each member. Limitation, people are unable to make adjustments for their normal work roles and relationships. So when you have these committees, ideally you should be putting people on these committees who actually are going to give you the best representation. People who are level-headed and people who will see things through. For instance, don't put somebody on a committee to resolve issues when they're not really interested in resolving problems. They're really more interested in creating problems or turmoil or chaos. And you do have some limitations. People are unable to make adjustments for their work normal work roles and relationships. Sometimes people get on the committee and they're conflicted between being on the committee and actually doing work, their job, and or with some certain people who are on it may have some relationship issues. Systems view of affected committees. So when you look at this, you see inputs, processes, and outcomes. So if you look at the size, composition, and agendas. Look at the processes, leadership role, group structures, support, and quality. So as you see, these things are all interrelated. So if you have a breakdown somewhere in here, it's going to ultimately affect, the output and also to the feedback. So agendas, surface agenda, official task of the group. Hidden agendas, members' private emotions and motives. Criteria for effective surface agendas. Distribute well in advance, specify the date, time, place, primary purpose of the meeting. So there's always going to be agenda, official agenda, and then there's individual agendas. A lot of times you may find where people have individual agendas, they're not for the betterment of the organization or for the group. It could be personally self-serving or something that may only be good for the group. Agendas, list presenters, time allotted to them, and time available for discussion. Focus on decisions and accommodate new items, address items in priority order, identify date, time, place, and next meeting. So there's a methodology and the way you go about when you have agendas. You try to make sure you're fair to everybody. Everybody has a chance to speak. We stay focused on the items and the things that's most important. And you got to also make sure that, everybody understands when, where to meet and how long they expect to meet. Task and social leadership roles. So when we look at task and social roles, let's look at this. Task, define a problem or goal for the group. Request facts, items, or opinions from members. Provide facts, ideas. So when you think in terms of this is how you go about getting the job done. When you think about the task roles, how we go about getting that, what do we need to do? Let's have some discussion, let's get some feedback, give us some information, and ultimately we want to test and see, make sure that this stuff actually works that we come up with. Social roles. Support the contributions of others, encourage them by recognition. Sense the mood of the group and help members become aware of it. Reduce the tension and reconcile difference. So when we look at this, we're really dealing with the people side. The task is dealing with the work side. This is dealing with the people side of who actually does the work, to make sure that you're addressing things with them so that they can continue to do the things they're supposed to do. Facilitating effective meetings. So when you consider who should and who should not be present, select a good site for the meeting. Use technology to competently handle the meeting. Give appropriate credit to those who participate. So when you talk about these meetings, you have to keep in mind when you have these meetings, are you trying to have productive meetings? If you are, you have to make sure that you get in the right people in there and not letting the wrong people in. And take advantage of everything that you can that actually will make things possible, such as the technology, like virtual phone calls and virtual meetings and things along those lines. Facilitate effective meetings. Use open questions and directed questions. Reject superficial excuses. Inspire members to overcome obstacles. Balance serious discussions with time for fun. Summarize, progress, and identify unresolved issues. Make assignments for the future. So when you see facilitating these types of meetings, one of the things you want to do is facilitate the type of meeting. You want to make sure it keeps going. It doesn't get stagnant. Give for instance, if you're having this topic and you're discussing something and somebody brings up something out in left field and people get derailed and start talking about that. As a facilitator, one of the things you have to do is to bring them back to the topic and get them off the wrong subject and make sure that everything moves as it should. You have accountability. You're signing things. You're holding people accountable. And you also have deadlines and things like that to meet. Structured approaches. So when we see a couple of different ways, we've got 5 of them: brainstorming, nominal group technique, Delphi decision making, dialectic decision methods, and group decision support system. So we're going to talk about each one of those. Brainstorming encourages creative thinking in groups. Electric brainstorming using computer technology. Guidelines for participants. Generate as many ideas and with creativity. Build upon, extend, and combine early ideas and withhold criticism of other ideas. So when you're brainstorming, you're trying to do something in a positive manner. You're trying to move forward. You're not there to complain about things. You're there to figure out how to resolve things. Underlying principles. Deferred judgment. All ideas are encouraged without criticism or evaluation. Quantity valued much as it breeds quality. So when you're having this brainstorming, one of the things you're not doing is still going to be critical of other people about what they say or what their input is. You don't want to give somebody an idea that you don't value what they say. So with brainstorming, we have some advantages and disadvantages. So when we look at the advantages, group members are enthusiastic participation is broader than normal. Group maintains strong organization. Ideas are built upon extended. So people, this is where you actually, in other words, 5 people can give you more than 1 person can because you get input from all 5. So you have advantages of bringing this group in. Disadvantages. Fear that one's creative thoughts will be looked down upon, independent thought and criticism of one's ideas not contribute to the group cohesion, failure to set and follow ground rules, organizational history of not taking action to implement ideas. Only person can speak at one time. So you do have rules and things you have that you should follow by that. But you have to make sure that you first of all, you feel like you should be in the room. You feel like you add value. Don't be afraid to say stuff and follow the rules and make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak and we're not stepping on each other. Nominal group technique. Members have minimal interaction prior to producing a decision. Members are brought together and given a problem. Solutions are developed independently and ideas are shared in a structured format. Brief time is allotted for clarifying queries. Members individually designate their preferences by a secret ballot and the group decision is announced. So you see, you have your fair share of independent people come together, get the information, they go work on something, they come up with something, and then they submit things anonymously, and then based upon the submissions is what you come up with, decide what the group is going to do. So advantages, you have opportunity, equal opportunity for people to participate, prevention, nobody's dominating that stuff, and there's no tight control. Of disadvantages, members are frustrated by the rigidity of the procedure. Members gain no feelings of cohesion. Members do not get the social needs, and members do not benefit from cross-fertilization of ideas. So you see with the disadvantages where you don't get to work together as a group, you don't get to learn from each other, you don't get to interact, and you don't get to become cohesive. Delphi decision making. Delphi decision making. Panel of relevant people chosen to address an issue. Series of questionnaires are sequentially distributed to respondents. Panels are asked to identify future problems, project market trends, predict future of affairs, state of affairs. So this is when people come together, usually subject matter experts, and they're given these questionnaires, and they are to answer and respond to these certain type of questions, to try to get an idea of what they believe is relevant for this organization at present and in the future. Explanation, Delphi decision making. Explanations of their conclusions can be shared. Written responses are summarized and fed back to members. Participants are making another decision based on the new information. Process is repeated until responses converge and a report is final. So it's kind of like we go to the drawing board once. This is what we came up with. Now that opened up some new doors. Let's go back to the drawing board, see what we come up with, and you keep repeating that process. Advantages, elimination of interpersonal problems, efficient use of experts' time, adequate time for reflection, analysis by respondents, diversity and quantity of ideas, accuracy of predictions and forecasts. So you do get some consistency there with that, with the process where you see people kind of doing things, but it's kind of like they don't get to work together, but they get to do some stuff. You're not working. You come together, work together, but you're doing it independently. So dialectic decision making. So when we look at this, we see problem, we see proposal, we see A and B, assumptions, A and B, presentation. We see choice, and we see A, B, compromise. So the goal is, look at these proposals and look at these assumptions, and you go back and forth between the members to ultimately come up to a compromise, A and a B, and then you ultimately try to select which one is the better. It offers a way to overcome problems of incomplete evaluation of options in decision making. So benefits: a better understanding of proposals, underlying premises, and pros and cons. Members feel more confident about their choice. So this is where people feel good about it and they're working together. And in this capacity, it's a little bit different than others. But if you got the right type of people, it's something that can actually be very beneficial and work really well. Limitations: propensity to forge a weak compromise to avoid choosing sides, focusing more on who were the better debaters. So sometimes people lose their purpose or what was the game plan. You know, you're like, well, we came up with a compromise, but it ain't really the best. We just did this kind of just go along, and then sometimes you may figure out, you know what? You focus it more on who are the debaters, who are the good debaters, and because they were good debaters, I'm inclined to go with what he or she shared, not because it's the best idea. Crowdsourcing. So when you look at crowdsourcing, temporary method for obtaining inputs from a wide variety of individuals, involves outsourcing a large scale task to a group of self-selected people who then work together to produce a single solution. Crowdsourcing can either draw from internal or external sources. So this is something that can be very beneficial when you bring in a group of who don't know each other, you bring them together and you put them on different projects. And I shouldn't say don't know each other because they could know each other, but they may come from different departments within the organization. And you can draw on internal or external people. Therefore, you can get information from folks within the organization, folks outside of it. So the potential outcomes for outsourced process. So supports for decisions, quality of decisions and problem solving improves. Individual development, social facilitation. Members try harder to contribute on a task just because other people are around. Conformity members are late to the perceived expectations and norms of the majority. So having people come together, support for decisions, like somebody can play off your decision, help improve it. People try hard because they see other people trying hard. Consensus. Group engages in a widespread input gathering, which results in a shared level of understanding. Consensus oriented members can and will support the decision made. Ideas for reaching consensus: conduct periodic and non-binding straw polls, suggest a supermajority vote. So realistically, when you look at getting that consensus, I do like that because it's almost democratic. By virtue of we got 30 people and we get together and we work on something, we used to come up with ideas and going back and forth, we're working together. And then at the end, we come up with our conclusions and stuff. We look to say, well, how many people felt this way? How many people felt that way? And you look and say, well, who was the consensus? Who was the majority? So, okay, let's go with that. Consensus. Ask members to withdraw controversial proposals or stand aside to let the group proceed. Create a subgroup and empower it to make a decision. Distill the concerns into major groups to pinpoint patterns of problems. So, with a consensus, if you got somebody, some people that's not quite, or might be standing in the way, you can step aside because you have other group members that can work things out. And then ultimately, what you can do is condense that even down more from that group to come up with a core group who might be say, okay, big group came up with this. Now, a smaller group is going to take that and try to come up with some solutions and answers. So with the consensus, Expedite closing of discussion by letting each member speak for a limited time. Representatives of major positions speak for all others. So when you have this, everybody gets a chance to speak, but you're going to have representatives that's going to speak, and they'll speak for certain members of their group. Facilitating helping a group attain resounding success, maximize the sufficient use of time, feel satisfied with his efforts. So with the facilitation, you think in terms of keeping the group moving forward. You know, whatever it is that they need to keep them moving forward, you do that. That's what a good facilitator will do. So effective facilitator, encourage a group to separate idea getting from idea evaluation, generate multiple solutions to evaluate, avoid personal attacks, attain a balanced contributions from its members, add on other ideas. So again, this is kept keeping things going in a positive direction and making sure that people are getting along, they're not attacking each other, and we are looking at the right thing and we are drawing conclusions. And when we get out in left field, facilitator will help bring us back. Identify the criteria for judging potential solutions. So when he looks at process and setting aside the time at the end of the meeting to examine what went well, what went poorly, how the group's behavior could be improved. So again, the facilitator is the person who tries to keep things going. So they want to look at, sometimes we refer to this like a after action review, where we sit down, let's talk about the things that went, the good, bad, and the ugly. How can we be better next time? So you have some weaknesses. Sometimes we have these, sometimes it can be kind of slow and kind of expensive, depending upon, it's got, for instance, if you got to bring people in from all different parts of the country, you know, uh, group think. People have a tendency sometimes to start thinking like a group, oh, this is how the group is feeling, so I'm going to go along with that. Symptoms of self-censorship of critical thoughts and rationalizing their actions. So this is basically when people start thinking alike. Illustration of invulnerability, uh, anonymity and morality, reliance on self-appointed and mind guards, stereotyping others outside of the group, pressure on descendants to conform to the group, reduced by the devil's advocate or by red teaming. Devil's advocate, guardians of clear moral thinking who provide constructive criticism. So when you have so many things happen, it's not going well, then you have this the devil's advocate, come in and try to say, let's look at this and try to figure out how we can actually do this and consider it to be constructive and not destructive in nature. Weakness of committees. A subsect of a group challenges understanding assumptions, takes an adversarial viewpoint, proposes scenarios that may have not been considered. So this is basically when somebody's like, yeah, they're playing devil's advocate, but they're not doing it in a positive way. They're trying to undermine. And when you see this red teaming. Polarization. Individuals bring to the group their strong predispositions towards the topic. And this is when somebody's predisposed to think about something. For instance, if you're going to ask me to work on a project that I already think is bad, then there's a high probability that's going to be my posture all the way through. Risky shift, willingness to take chances with organizational resources as a group than they would as individuals. So this is when sometimes, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't do this by myself, but since the group is here, I'll be inclined to go along with this and take this risk when that may not be the best thing to do. So escalating commitment. Persevering and advocating a course of action despite rational evidence that it will result in failure. So, when you think about this, advocating for action, of course, despite rational evidence. So basically, you're moving forward with something, or you're telling people to do something, even though there's evidence that says it may not, but you still keep pressing. Selective perception results in confirmation bias. So when you have this confirmation bias, it's something that you believe. I believe this is good, therefore I'm going to try to find a way to support that. Ego needs of the decision makers affects decisions. Do you have somebody who has an ego? I need to be in charge. I need to be one to come up with ideas. and this is, oh, I want to be the person taking charge. Whatever it may be, it could be any number of things. Admiration of leaders who are risk takers. You have some people who look at folks as with admiration. Well, if I'm looking at them with admiration, there's a high probability that I might be inclined to believe almost anything she says. Group decisions dilute and thin out responsibilities. Sometimes you find with group stuff, they can dilute the thin out stuff because they're looking from a large macro perspective, not from micro. Because I'm looking from a broad perspective, not from my perspective. And so sometimes you can get lost in what it is you're actually trying to do. Social loafers, individual members who shrink responsibility with justifications. These other people can, you tell them, this is what I need you to do this task, and they can go in there, who shirk responsibility with justifications. They can tell you why they didn't do it and give you a justification for it, even though it doesn't make good sense. Other related problems, linearity bias, propensity to make overly simple cause-effect conclusions. Bottom line, when you're looking at cause and effective conclusions and stuff, you have to be realistic. You can't have biases creep into that, because in some places that can cost jobs or money or cause lawsuits. Egocentrism, temptation to overemphasize our importance while forcing a decision. Nobody, when you're trying to work in this capacity, you got to get people to understand that everybody brings value to the table and no one person is the king or the queen. Framing bias, temptation to be overly influenced by how the problem was presented. So it's like, sometimes you look at a situation and stuff, and let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 4 or 5, but I'm inflaming my stuff. I'm telling you it's a 7 or 8 or a 9, because that's my bias is kicking in. Self-confidence bias, premature belief that the best solution has already been uncovered. It's like, well, why are we still going to something when we've already figured this out? Versus, well, let's keep going to see if we can find ways to fine tune this. Anti-statistical bias, reluctance to examine relevant statistical information and give the weight. Some people are more qualitative than quantitative. So they have a tendency sometimes to be anti-stats. And you're like, well, why are we looking at the numbers when we can actually see what John said, what Mike said? Yeah, but if John and Mike are just 1 or 2 people, what if you have decades of people who've done stuff? Well, the only way you're going to get that is looking at stats. Overcome through proper group structures to be selected. Group size is an important factor. Various leadership roles to be played. So when you structure these groups properly, and you get, first of all, and get the right size. For instance, do you want 30 people on there, or do you want 5 to 7? Do you have people in the right roles, right leadership roles? Do you have a leader designated that can actually be the strong facilitator to keep things going when they need to? That concludes this chapter.